Hello everybody, welcome to Amazing You. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Lee Griessel, an executive coach and facilitator living in South Africa. Welcome, Lee.
Hi, Rani. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. Nice to have you too, to talk to the audience. Thank you for taking the time to be here today.
My pleasure.
So tell us about your story, Lee. How you started your business.
Fantastic. Yeah, happy to. So I spent many years in the corporate space. In fact, for my sins, I trained as a COBOL programmer in my youth. And very much got involved in the IT space and spent about 25 years in the corporate space. And then I got involved in the succession development program and the mentorship program within the organization that I was a part of. And I just fell in love with the coaching side. So I just realized that talking to PCs is very different from helping and supporting people. And I decided that the corporate stuff wasn't for me anymore. And I got involved then in really investigating and getting involved much more in the coaching side. So I made the decision, and it's now 14 years ago, to step away from the corporate stuff and really got involved in coaching. Two reasons. One, because I loved working with people. And secondly, my daughter was then quite young and I really wanted to spend time with her. So it was probably the best thing that I ever did. So, yeah.
Thank you. And what has been the greatest challenge in your life, Lee? And how did you overcome it?
I think the greatest challenge was probably stepping away from the corporate space, because when you're in a job and you're getting a really good salary and you've got all the trimmings that make that such a secure space,
yes.
It's quite a challenge to now give that up and move into something that is totally unknown and full of uncertainty. And you really don't know where the next paycheck's coming from. So that probably was my biggest challenge. But like I said, as much as it was the challenge, it's also been the biggest blessing.
Wow. So how did you overcome that challenge of stepping out in an unknown world?
I think the biggest thing for me was just staying focused on what was important for me. Right. And really focusing on building something and starting really small. I think right at the beginning, I remember probably the first 6-8 months of that journey, yes. I really worked a lot with doing trade exchanges. Okay. So trading some of my previous skill, which was in the IT space and in the process space, trading that for coach training, trading that for helping people to get coached so I could get familiar with how to coach. So really looking at doing a lot of trade exchanges and really staying focused on what was important for me at that time. Wow. And at that time, it was really important for me to be able to also be home with my daughter in the afternoons. And I think that was probably my biggest driver, really, really wanting that and not wanting to get caught back into that corporate space where your time is not your own.
That's so true.
So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And who has been the most influential person in your life, Lee, and why?
I think if I consider that, it probably was one of the very first managers that I ever had. Okay. I was really young, I was in business, and he saw the potential in me. Wow. And I think he breathed belief into me and just gave me a sense of I could do anything. I think he probably was the one that really got me into a space of believing in myself. Right. And believing in my abilities to do whatever it was that I wanted. And I'm very grateful for him for the opportunities that he gave me when I was that young. I think I was about 23 at the time, and he really took me under his wing and he mentored me and trained me to deal with a lot of the corporate politics and how to navigate that world, which can sometimes be very daunting and intimidating when you're at that age.
Yeah. And what are the 3 qualities that you admire most in that person?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is he was incredibly firm. Okay. And sometimes I really didn't like the way that he got me to do stuff. in terms of the way that I'd answer the phone. And he'd say to me, you don't answer the phone like that. And sometimes he would be almost to the point of being very authoritarian in his approach.
Right.
But as much as he was firm, he was also very fair. So I remember him for that. He was hard on me, but it was to stretch me and to challenge me.
Yeah.
It wasn't to intimidate or frighten me or have a power over me. It was much more to grow and challenge me. So that would have been probably the first thing. The second thing I think that he had, and the quality that I saw in him, is authenticity. Mm-hmm. He was really authentic. You knew exactly where you stood with him. He always showed up the same, no matter who he was dealing with. He was always himself. There was he didn't put on a work mask. He didn't come up as being anything different, but he was always himself. Mm-hmm. And the third one, I think, is probably integrity. That when he said something, you knew that you could hold him to that. Right. He would stick with his word. He was always true to his word, no matter what the situation, and he wouldn't falter. No matter how much pressure he was under, he always would stick with what he said he would do. Wow. So those are probably the biggest ones.
Wow. And what quote has helped you to cope in challenging times?
I think I probably have two that come to mind. One is everything happens for a reason.
Yes.
So whenever anything happens, I just go, you know what, there's a reason this is happening. And there's whatever the reason, I know there'll be a gift in this. No matter how hard the time is, no matter what's going on in my space, I know everything happens for a reason. And I think the second one that comes to mind is, and it's one that I always share with my daughter specifically, right, is never make money the reason to do or not to do anything. Because if you're driven by money, or if you don't do something because you feel you don't have the money, you're missing out on huge opportunity. Yes. So to not ever use that as an excuse, and many of us do. It's like, oh, I don't have the money to do that, or it's going to cost too much to do that. Whereas I've really tried to come from a place of never make money the reason to do or not to do anything. You'll find the money. If it's important enough for you, you'll find the money. Yes. Yeah. And if you're offered a job and you just want to take it for the money, often it's the wrong job for you. It's to really get in touch with what's your reason for wanting to take on this work, and not to just do it for the money, because you'll be selling your soul. Yes. In some of those instances, for sure.
What would you say, Lee, to encourage people today who are listening and watching and who are facing some tough times?
I think the biggest thing, and it probably brings us to some of the topic that I wanted to chat to you a little bit about today, is really like, what's your self-talk? What's the story that you're telling yourself? How are you speaking about things? How are you listening to things? And what's the story you're telling yourself up here? Yes. To really make sure that you're coming from a place of positive intent, and working with what's important for you to avoid that negative self-talk that's happening.
That's true. That's true. Thank you. So today you wanted to talk to us about the power of language. So tell us more about that, Lee.
Yeah. So I've just got to know that whatever the story we're telling ourselves is the thing that's going to direct you, right? Yes. And I often, in my workshops, I'll often say, remember, you're the best friend you have, right? Absolutely. You're with yourself 24/7. Yes. Nobody else is with you as much as you're with you. So it's really important that the way you're speaking to yourself, the language that you're using for yourself, is positive. Yeah. One of the things that I've heard many people say is that if you talked to your friends the way you talk to yourself, would you still have any? So to be really mindful, I've seen people be really respectful to their ministers, to their bosses, to their employees, to their partners. But when they start the dialogue here, they can be really rude and disrespectful. And they come from a place of almost taking out the big stick and beating themselves up. And coming from a place of I should have, would have, could have. they start calling themselves names, and
Yes.
it becomes really demotivating for you as an individual, is to really check in, like, how am I speaking at? When we look at language, there's a couple of things that are probably my 3 go-to areas around language.
Yes.
One, and many of the people that I speak to have heard them before, but they're great reminders. So the one is that the brain doesn't understand a negative.
Absolutely.
So when you're voicing things from a place of don't cry, don't worry, don't stress, if the brain doesn't understand a negative, it X's out the don'ts, and you end up with the instruction of stress, panic, worry, cry. Yeah. And you can get that, right? If you're sitting there, you're going, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. You're inciting a state of panic within your system. And that's how you're going to start responding. So physiologically, you're getting a reaction to the language that you're using. And it can really bring about stress and anxiety just from languaging it differently. So one of the key things for me is just sharing with my clients is whenever you hear yourself voice it in the negative, whenever you hear yourself using a statement like don't something, is check in, what do I want instead? Right? Yes. And frame it, voice it positively. Mm-hmm. So if I don't want to worry, what do I want instead? I want to be calm. If I don't want to get stressed, what do I want instead? I want to relax. Absolutely. So think about what it is you want rather than what you don't want. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, because we've done that a lot of time, thinking more of what we don't want rather than thinking of what we do want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we really need to stay focused on the positive intention of where we're headed. So that would be the first rule, right? The brain doesn't understand a negative. Mm-hmm. The second rule that we would go with is the brain will often take every instruction as a literal instruction.
Right.
So it sounds weird to say it like that, but think about your brain as being your Google, right? It's like your internet search, and everything you've ever learned from day dot is stored in your subconscious brain.
Yes.
So you've learned words, you've learned rules, you've learned all sorts of information, and that's sitting in the back of your mind. Yeah. So a simple explanation of how this could work is, if I had to say to you, Rani, how you're doing, and you say, I'm drowning, the brain goes through its Google search and it finds the word drowning and it says, how do I help Rani not drown?
Right.
And what it does at a physiological level, it starts to create the response to keep you safe. Okay. So from drowning, it's warming up the body temperature, holding on to the oxygen, putting adrenaline into the system. Yes. So from that literal instruction, it set off a physical response which can be unresourceful for you, depending on the language that you're using, right?
Yes, yeah.
And other ways of inciting stress and anxiety, I often hear it in the corporate space where I say to people, oh, you're busy? And they go, I have 1,000,001 things to do. The brain is going, sure, 1,000,001 things to do. And then I say, let's make a list. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I say, is that it? Yep, that's it. I say, but the brain is still expecting the other 999,000 odd things. So it's created a sense of anxiety for no reason, right?
Yes.
Because of how you've languaged that.
Absolutely.
So to language it for what it actually is, and to not awfulize it or start making it bigger than what it is, because you'll start off a physical response that may not be resourceful.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Make sense?
It makes absolute sense, because the way we think, it does affect our nervous system, because the body will start to react in that way.
Exactly.
So the nervous system will try to protect us by reacting that way. Yes. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really useful that we start checking in, like, what are the sayings or what are the literal sayings that I've habituated, right? What have I learned to say? And often we learn these from our parents, from our teachers, from our peers, and they become second nature, right?
Yes.
I know when my daughter was at varsity, she came back at university. She came back one day and she said, Mom, I just realized I got hooked into the language at the university. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, they have a certain way of speaking, right? And if you talk to any student and you say how it's going, they always go, oh, I'm exhausted.
Okay.
She said, and this morning somebody said to me, how am I going? And without even thinking, I said, I'm exhausted, because I bought into the speak of that environment. She said, and I caught myself because I realized that I'm not exhausted at all. I'd slept well, my assignments were up to speed, everything was in order, but yet I'd got hooked into this habituated language pattern that exists in that environment. Now that happens when we're working in organizations, when we're part of social clubs, when we're in the school environment. We hear a way of speaking that becomes the frame that holds that environment together.
Yes.
And if that frame is a negative frame, or if the language that's been spoken there is a negative way of speaking, we buy into that because we want to feel like we belong.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So it's really important that we check, have I bought into is it reality? Or have I just bought into the way of speaking in that space? Yes. So that's the second one, to really watch out for. One of the things that I say often.
Right.
The third one that we recognize is that the brain doesn't know the difference between real and imagined.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if we think about it from that space, if you think when you've woken up out of a bad dream, your heart is racing, there's palpitations, you're sweating, you feel like you've run a mile, it's not reality. It was driven out of the imagination.
Yes.
But yet at a physical level, we responded as if it was our reality.
Yeah.
We've seen some of the research with sports teams, right, where they've recorded hockey players, for example. When hockey players have gone in to score a goal and they've recorded their vital signs, and then they've had them sit quietly and imagine scoring the same goal.
Yes.
And the vital signs have been almost identical.
Yeah.
Again, the power of visualization, the power of the imagination is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
And we've got to really, again, check, what am I imagining? Is it real or is it imagined?
Absolutely.
So those three would probably be my go-to in terms of language. So the first one, the brain doesn't understand a negative. The second one, the brain takes every instruction as a literal instruction. And the third one is that the brain doesn't understand the difference, or doesn't know the difference between real and imagined. And if we can catch ourselves on those things, we're already on a path of speaking much more positively to ourselves and articulating it very differently without falling into the trap or the social frames that we often fall into. And that certainly will help keep you together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. I think it's very important, the power of language, because the language that we use will direct the life that we want to live.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
And be kind.
Yes.
No?
Because if we are negative, it's like we are creating a negative future for ourselves. And if we are positive, we are creating a brighter future for ourselves. And we are the creator of our life, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on. And it starts with how we're languaging things.
Absolutely.
You know, how we're articulating it here, how we're saying it out there, the stories we tell ourselves, all of that directs and helps to create the future that you're wanting. So to be really mindful of what's happening in this space.
That's so true. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Lee. And tell us now briefly about your business and how can people contact you, Lee?
Perfect. So I'm involved in a couple of organizations. I run one organization. It's called Untitled Development. I actually run it now together with my daughter. My daughter's also now a coach after all this time. She's also now a accredited coach. So her and I run that business together, where we really focus on coaching, facilitation, project management, and our core focus in that space is self-leadership and team effectiveness. Wow. So we're running programs now around the world for smaller organizations, really helping their teams to become much more self-led, yes, and then building the team environment. So that's my own business. But I also do quite a lot of accountability coaching. Okay. So I do accountability coaching for the Real Entrepreneur Academy. So I'm one of their accountability coaches. Okay. And I do accountability coaching and financial coaching for another organization that's actually based in Australia, where we look at helping people manage their cash flow, help them to get clear on their budgeting, and really putting in really good financial habits. So those are probably the three main areas that I focus in. I do have quite a strong LinkedIn profile, so people are welcome to go and find me on LinkedIn, connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm really happy to connect with whoever wants to chat to me. I'm always up to have some good conversations. And they can also visit our website. So our website is www.bianzo.co.za. So it is a South African-based site, a South African-based company, but they are welcome to go and have a look at that too.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much for sharing these powerful words of wisdom. And
you're really welcome.
And I wish you and your daughter and your company a lot of success.
Thanks, Rani. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and it's been great just having this time together. Yes. I hope to be with you more often.
Absolutely.
So, fantastic.
Yes. And thank you so much as well for listening today.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody who's joining us. Cool.